Hi, folks. Welcome to the Routing Loop, a weekly show about all things AWS networking. Today we have a session for you on DNS and DNS forwarding, DNS delegation. I have two guests with me, Adish and Tekena. I'll let them introduce themselves. So I'll start first. Tom Adamski, you may have seen me many times before. I'm one of the moderators of the show, one of the co-owners. I've been here last week. We kind of rotate, so you might see different people moderating on different weeks. It's me this week. Hopefully you enjoy the session. Adish, do you want to do a quick intro and say who you are? I see you already in your signature, you have Amazon Route 53, so I think that gives us a little bit of a hint of what you're up to. But if you can introduce yourself, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, and hello to all the viewers of the Routing Loop. My name is Arish Bove. I'm a product manager on the Amazon Route 53 service, and I'm here to talk about a feature that we launched back in June. So, kind of newish. It's a new delegation feature for your Amazon Route 53 endpoints.
Cool. And whereabouts are you based?
I'm based out of Seattle. Uh, I've been in AWS for some time now, just over 6 years. Um, and I really enjoy launching features for our customers that they enjoy using.
Cool. Yeah, and Adish and I collaborated a lot on a lot of the feature launches and throughout the year, so it's good to have you on. Tekena, you want to do a quick intro?
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Tekena. I'm a senior solutions architect. Been with Amazon for just about 8 years. I'll be 8 years in a couple of months. And I work with a team of SAs that help customers with Microsoft workloads. Happy to be here. And I was also involved with Adish and the team for the launch of this new feature. So I'm excited to share demos with you today. Nice to meet you all.
Cool. How did you get roped into DNS? Because is that because of your Microsoft background? You had to do a lot of work with Active Directory, DNS with Microsoft, so now it kind of makes sense to get more plugged in with DNS.
Yes, exactly. The team reached out to me because yes, I mean to your point, I do have a background in Microsoft DNS, Active Directory, and the likes. And many of our customers still use AD integrated DNS. So when this feature was released, it sort of made sense to try to bring in somebody with that background to help craft the blog post and also talk to customers about this new feature.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of
And yeah,
patterns out there
yeah,
combining Route 3 Resolver and Active Directory, and often customers trying to figure out what do I do first? Do I do Resolver first and Active Directory, or do Active
yeah,
Directory first and then Resolver? We all know the answer is do Resolver first, so that's just leaving it out there.
yeah, exactly.
And I
And also we also, I mean, again, going back to what you just mentioned, even for our directory service as well, we also have a very tight integration as well with Resolver. So again, to your point, customers do have that ask that question, and using Resolver makes DNS, especially if you have a multi-account, multi-region deployment, a lot easier. So yes, I would say yes, and Resolver should be your go-to.
Awesome. Yeah. And before we start, I want to say hi to everyone in the chat. I see familiar faces in there. Ken, Dominic. I see we have folks joining from Colombia. This is interesting time zone. So I think this is during working hours. I know when we run this show in America time zones, it's in the middle of the working days. And I've heard some customers actually take their a break out of the day to watch the session. So really appreciate that. But then I think we're a little bit better for European time because you can go back home and turn us on Twitch and just watch it. Cool. Adish, I'm going to hand off to you if you want to start presenting, and we can kick off with a little bit of an intro, but I know Takena has some demos, so we'll see actual walkthroughs of how things work and what they do. If you guys have questions, just throw them in the chat. We'll answer as we go through it.
Yeah, happy to walk through this.
Okay.
Let me
Adish, I'm sharing your
let
slides. You can
me
kick off presentation. Perfect.
yeah. So as Tom mentioned, we are here to talk about the new Amazon Route 53 endpoint delegation feature. once again to the viewers who are joining. My name is Adish Bobe. I'm a product manager on the Amazon Route 53 team, and I'm joined by Takina Urgbani, who's a senior specialist solution architect on AWS. So we're going to talk about. I'm going to start by introducing what is DNS zone delegation. So to the viewers who are new to this space and who want to know what is this DNS zone delegation and why do you need it? I'm going to do a little bit of a primer on this one. I'm going to then talk about what's new with resolver endpoints and how does it help you with the delegation of your domains and subdomains. Um, I'm going to go a little deeper into some specific use cases that the resolver endpoints help solve for delegation. And then I'm going to turn it over to Takina to do a demo of how this all works in action so that you can see it and hopefully you get to try it out yourself as well. So, to those of you who are new to the space of what DNS zone delegation is, this is a very common process where you can assign different parts of your DNS namespace, domains, subdomains, to separate set of authoritative name servers for management. Um, so that you have control over the subdomains and you can provide those control to different entities or different teams or parts of your organization. And there are really three reasons why you would want to use DNS zone delegation. So, one is the decentralized management that it provides. So, it allows different departments or different teams within your organization to manage specific subdomains independently instead of having a single administrator handle all of the domains for all of the teams, which can get pretty messy or pretty difficult very quickly. Um, Customers also said they want a more hierarchical management of their DNS namespace. So with zone delegation, it allows you to create that logical hierarchical structure within your namespace, making it easier to manage very large or complex domains that you may have in your organization. Um, and then with that comes improved control and security. So by assigning control to different teams and different DNS servers, it also provides a layer of security and fault tolerance so that you're not dependent on one single namespace or one single server for all of your domains and subdomains. So this is really what DNS zone delegation is. A key part of uh, how you can achieve zone delegation is what I refer to, or what the industry refers to as iterative queries. So let's go through this example and really walk through this very simple example of how you can achieve zone delegation. So you have this larger parent DNS server that holds all of your DNS records. You have uh, this child zone that is created under this parent zone. Let's call it blog.example.com. And then the parent zone, which is example.com, you would need to create name server records. So these are nothing but references that say, hey, once a query comes to me, refer to this other name server for the subdomain. So in case of a DNS resolver that receives a query for one of the delegated subdomains, what the parent zone server would do is it will provide this referral to say, take this NS records for this child zone instead of giving you the IP address. And then the child server or the zone where it's hosted, that is going to provide you with the final IP address for that subdomain that you have requested. So this entire process is called iterative queries, where you go to the parent zone, gives you the NS record, gives you a referral, you take that, go to the child zone, and so on. And so it works very well, as I mentioned, for an organization that has decentralized management. Um, just putting this in perspective of how it would work for a large organization, let's take again this example of a parent domain that is hosted in your organization, and you have a central DNS administrator who's managing that in a authoritative DNS server. Um, it creates this subdomains healthtech.example.com, which also has delegation for other subdomains like aws.healthtech.example.com. Now, something to know over here is that not all of these DNS authoritative DNS servers would be hosted in a single place. They could be hosted in different environments. They could be hosted in different locations, and so that really gives that control to different teams to manage their own subdomains and their own servers. Um, and so we see these more examples where you can have fintech.example.com or retail.example.com. All of these are nothing but subdomains which are referenced in the original example.com. So how does this all work when a query comes in? So you have a client that makes a query for, let's say, app1.aws.healthtech.example.com, which should essentially go directly to the one that you see in the bottom over there that says aws.healthtech.example.com. And so it would make that query first to its own DNS resolver. Um, that DNS resolver would then query the parent domain, which would get a NS record for reference. That NS record for reference would then say to the DNS resolver, hey, go to healthtech.example.com, which will again give you a reference to finally the aws.healthtech.example.com. So that completes the entire cycle where you have the initial recursive query, then that goes through iterative queries, and then you finally get the IP from the final server. So this is how the whole process works for delegation. Now, um, what?
If you go back for a second, Adish, just
Yeah,
because I think we can spend a little bit more time on this. I guess if I wanted to do it the wrong way, right, I could, in theory, have one zone example.com and then manage all the records for all the other zones in the same zone. The
yeah.
downside of that would be that if I want to do some delegated management, right, so whoever should be adding records for health.example now has to go into my massive master zone that everyone has to just add and make edits in. It's kind of not very scalable, complicated to manage. So this delegation model allows us to, like, anytime you're creating a subdomain that you know you will have more records in, it makes sense to just create a new zone and then let somebody else manage it, right? That's going to be hosted on the same location where the pirate domain is, but it could also be hosted elsewhere. It really at that point doesn't matter because that the delegation piece is kind of like a HTTP redirect. You're just saying, okay, if you need something in that more specific zone, go somewhere else. That other thing is going to tell you the answer.
Exactly, and it goes back to the three goals that I mentioned. Why you would want the zone delegation. To the example that you called out, where you could host all of these subdomains in the same under the same parent domain and have them in the same server, but then it breaks the hierarchical model or the decentralized model that customers want to achieve and fulfill for their organization. And so this provides them that decentralized ownership without having to put everything under a single server.
And just to add a bit more color to that as well. So this big company, example.com, acquires some companies in the future using this hierarchical delegation allows them to simply delegate DNS requests for that new subsidiary or something to a different server, which their own team can manage. So this scales a lot more easily than if you put everything on one server.
Yep. And I guess it's a skill in itself to be able to come up with a pretty good hierarchy in the first place, right? So I know we're not going to be touching on that today, but that's another thing in itself that I've seen a lot of customers approach different ways. And how do you create that hierarchy? How do you do this naming convention so it makes sense? Cool. There is a few questions in the chat that maybe we can spend some time chatting about. So there's
Yeah.
a question from RSS around cost implications, which is kind of an interesting angle to look at it. right? Because now instead of a single zone where you're kind of managing everything in one place, you might have multiple zones. But ultimately, when public hosted zones, those costs are, you could say, minuscule of managing a single zone. Is that even a consideration? Because the operational overhead and the benefits that you listed, Adish, I think are worth whatever is that single zone. I don't know. Someone mentioned it's like 50 cents a month. I can't remember off the top of my head what a single public zone is.
Yeah, yeah. It's a trade-off at the end of the day between how much additional operations that you want to maintain by having a single parent zone and having the management of that done with a single owner versus having this decentralized model and then essentially simplifying your architecture and your operations by having a decentralized. Um, yeah, we do have costs of pricing for our public hosted zones listed on our website. I'll probably have to refer to them and get you the accurate cost. But um, for every additional public or hosted zone, yeah, it's probably a few cents that you add. Um, so I don't I feel for customers it becomes a question of whether they want that this hierarchical model and if it serves the purpose of their organization versus them having to manage everything in a single place and take on that additional cost of doing the management.
Yeah, got it. And then we do have some questions related to kind of the structure. Maybe we can touch on it a little bit. So there's like questions from Ken around, would it be one zone? How would you split your zones across account? How would you split your zones across VPCs? I
Hmm.
don't think again we'll have a lot of time to touch on this today, but I've seen it's the world's your oyster, right? Once you start doing this delegation, all these zones could be in different accounts, could be then mapped to any VPCs you want. And I guess maybe taking a step back, Ken had another question earlier about is this supported for, because it used to be just for public hosted zones, right? And then with this discussion, we now have this capability for private hosted zones.
Yeah, yeah. This is effectively to help you with, and I'll go into this in the next set of slides about how Route 50 Resolver endpoints helps you do this delegation with iterative queries for that are private zones that are not publicly reachable. That may be hosted, part of it on your AWS environment, part of it may be on your on-premises or your own environment. Um, but in general, the separation or how you want to set this up, it really depends on how you want to work backwards in your organization. Do you have different teams? Do you have different sub-organizations that need to own their own subdomain and that need that ownership to create records in their own subdomain? If yes, then this model works very well. If you have an organization which has a single administrator to manage all the domains and subdomains, then that becomes a different question. Then probably having this hierarchical setup is not the right option for you. So uh, it the answer to that question is it depends on your how your organization is set up. In this example that I'm showing, for example, over here you have a different team over here that's managing all the health tech activities. You have fintech, you have retail, and each of these have their own applications that need their own subdomains, which is why the ownership is divided between these teams. As Takina mentioned, you may also have a case where you're having a organization subsumed under your parent domain through acquisitions or M&A, and that might result in you having to now create this additional hierarchical structure. But if you already have one, then it becomes just an add-on where you can now say, well, my parent domain now just refers to this new subdomain that is owned by the subsumed organization.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's probably what the amount of time we're going to spend on kind of figuring out how the structure is going to look like. So I'll let you continue, Adish.
Yeah, I think that will require its own separate session.
Yep, we can something we can schedule.
uh, I do want to touch upon what's new with resolver endpoints. So, for our viewers who are not aware or don't know what resolver endpoints is, uh, resolver endpoints is a feature of Route 53, which allows you to perform DNS forwarding and DNS connectivity between your on-premises or your hybrid networks and AWS. So, and it allows the queries to be forwarded in both ways. So you can have an inbound uh, query forwarding with the inbound endpoint, where you can have queries from your on-premises um, going to AWS, and then you can also have outbound endpoints, which will have queries from your Amazon VPCs forwarded over the outbound endpoints to your on-premises DNS server. And the challenge was that before we launched this delegation feature on resolve endpoints, there was no support for iterative queries. So, as I mentioned before, the whole process where you have the parent zone giving referral to the child zone, um, that's not something that we supported, and that was a challenge for customers because now they had to effectively create their own self-managed DNS infrastructure and their own forwarding structure to do this iterative management of queries between their parent zone and the child zone, which obviously led to additional management overhead for them. So, with this launch, we are simplifying that process because now endpoints support iterative queries. This is a launch that we had back in June of this year, um, where you can do delegation of the authority for your subdomain directly to the endpoints. So the endpoints that sit between that do forwarding between your hybrid networks can now support both inbound, which is from your on-premises to AWS, or outbound delegation from your AWS to your on-premises.
I mean, the reason you need endpoints in the first place is that Route 53 resolver itself cannot natively talk to, which is what's providing DNS resolution inside of VPC, cannot natively talk to on-premise, as well as on-premise cannot talk to the resolver directly. So that's why you need these endpoint constructs to be able to let the resolver talk to on-premise, as well as allow the on-premise to send traffic to the resolver. And we used to have only the capability to do forwarding of queries, but now we also have this ability to do iterative queries and support delegation, which I have seen a lot of customers ask for as well. So it's nice that this is something that we now have available.
Yeah, it certainly helped a lot of customers fulfill those that hierarchical model that can keep those while having the hybrid setup between AWS and their on-premises. Um, I do want to touch upon some very key use cases that we have seen customers implement. Um, so very common use case is the inbound delegation, where you have your you have your parent zone. Let's take your example.com again, and the name server for that child zone, let's say healthtech.example, both hosted on your on-premises. And then you have the subdomain for healthtech.example.com, let's say aws.healthtech.example.com. That is hosted on a private hosted zone on Amazon Route 53. A private hosted zone allows customers today to create records for their private applications and host them on Amazon Route 53 for resolution. Um, so with this launch, which you can do both inbound and outbound delegation, in this use case, we'll talk about the inbound delegation. You can delegate the authority for a subdomain to Route 53. What that means is if a query is originating from, let's say, a client on your on-premises for aws.healthtech.com, example.com, which is hosted on Route 53, that query now will go through its normal process of doing the iterative between example and health tech. But then once it goes back to the DNS resolver and gets forwarded to the inbound endpoint, the inbound endpoint now has the ability to take that iterative query and forward it to the private hosted zone in that VPC it is attached to. so that you can now get the IP, which was not something that was previously possible. And this simplifies a lot of uh, s- setup for our customers, because previously they had to set up their own DNS infrastructure themselves, host it on an EC2 instance, create separate forwarders between their on-premises and VPCs. All of that gets simplified because now you can use inbound endpoints for that same purpose. And then we see a similar structure on the outbound side, where you can again delegate an authority for a subdomain that may be hosted on your on premises. So this is the complete reversal, where you have the primary zone that is hosted on Route 53, but the subdomains are hosted on your on premises. So again, a query that would come from one of your workloads in your VPC for a subdomain would then get forwarded through the outbound endpoint, um, and that would have the delegation rule to say, for this subdomain, please get the IP from my on-premises server. So another advantage of this outbound delegation is that previously customers had to set up multiple forwarding rules for each delegated subdomain. With this, you can just create one single outbound forwarding rule, delegated rule, and it would work for all the delegated subdomains.
So I guess from an operational point of view, it helps you from having to manage like a rule for each domain that you're forwarding to just configuring a delegation and then relying on the delegation configuration in the parent domain.
That's correct. So it would simplify not just the setup, where you don't have to create your own DNS infrastructure, but it also reduces the need to have separate one-on-one provisioning of forwarding rules for every single subdomain, which can also be very hard to manage, because every time there is an additional ask, you will have to go and create one in the Amazon Route Resolver.
Mm-hmm. And there's a question from the chat from Ken here around Microsoft AD integration. I don't know if Ken, that might be something for you. I guess since this is following standard, so this is not something that's like super custom. We're just allowing for delegation, something that DNS has supported for decades. I guess with Microsoft AD, are we starting to see some patterns emerge with integrations with Microsoft AD here?
Oh yeah.
Or is it too
Again,
early?
yes, yes, you're right. And this again goes back to the reason why I was pulled in into this project in the first place. Yes, it does work with Microsoft DNS. In fact, the demo that I have for you today uses um, Microsoft DNS. So yes, it does work with Microsoft DNS and other DNS types. Yeah, a lot of our customers use ADDNS, and so it will make it also very easy to integrate between their AD integrated DNS and reservoir endpoints as well. And yes, I do have a demo for this. I'll show you shortly.
Oh, excellent.
That's a great segue. Uh,
Excellent.
Over to you, Takina.
Okay, fantastic. Um, Thank you, Adish. Can you show my screen,
Yeah,
Tom, if
just
it's
moving on. Yeah,
okay?
just remove the other share and just start you. All right,
Okay.
you're good to go.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to show before I go into the demo proper, I wanted to show the demo resources. So this is one of the images that Adish shared earlier. This is for the inbound delegation and how it flows. And the way I want to demo this is by showing you exactly how I have set up, because this is trying to mimic an on-premises and AWS. So what I have done is I have two accounts, and then one account acts as the on-premises, and then the other acts as AWS. And what I've done is create a VPC pairing between two VPCs in those accounts. Now, in terms of the hierarchy or the hierarchical structure of the DNS, we have example.com that is delegated, that has delegated health tech and fintech to other DNS servers, subdomains. And then within health tech has also delegated aws.healthtech to reservoir endpoints. Fintech has also delegated aws.fintech to reservoir endpoint as well. This just shows the IP addresses and the servers I have. And to get this going for the inbound, these are the steps that we need to take. Some steps have to be carried out on AWS and some on premises. The first one will be to create a private hosted zone. So in this case, we want to delegate health tech. We want to delegate aws.healthtech.example.com to reservoir endpoint. So we create a private hosted zone for this. Then we'll create an A record for within that private hosted zone for the testing itself. And then we'll create an inbound resolver of type delegation, because with the release of this feature, we now have a new type of endpoint. Before now, it was just one, a forwarding endpoint. Now we have two. So you have forwarding and delegation. And then we'll associate that endpoint with the VPC where we have just created the private hosted zone. And after that, we will go onto the on-premises side, and then we will, within the healthtech.example.com zone, we will then create a delegation for the aws.healthtech.example.com, and then configure the NS records that will point to the IP address of the delegation inbound endpoint.
So just to summarize, and I guess you could probably have the actions a little bit crisscrossed, right? Because it's I know you're putting them in order of operations, but the left one is under the on-prem and the right one is under the VPC.
Yes, you're right.
On the left-hand side, we have the VPC. We have the environment that pretends to be on-prem and owns example.com. And then the right-hand side is the VPC that has aws.healthtech.example.com.
Yes.
And we just need to figure out how to do delegation such that DNS queries will flow according to the delegation.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let me pull my console in view. So, so this is the account that is the on-premises. In this account, I've got three servers. The first one is for example.com, and this is for healthtech.example.com, and the third one is for fintech.example.com. And it's just a client that I will use for the testing. And then on the AWS side, let me pull that in view as well. I have created, so this is the Route 53 console. Here I have created a private hosted zone called...
You may want to zoom in a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Let me see.
If folks need a bigger zoom, let us know in the chat. But I know it's probably too big, but yeah.
Hold on. It's, okay.
Yeah, I think this should be good enough.
120. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I've created a private hosted zone which I call aws.healthtech.com, right? And in that hosted zone, I've created an A record which I call app2.aws.healthtech.com. Just some A record that points to, let me move this here.
And this is a private hosted zone, just to clarify, right?
Yes.
Meaning it's not public, it's not registered anywhere. You don't even have to own example.com, which we don't own example.com, right? We're just using it, but we don't actually own the example.com domain.
Correct. And we have associated this private hosted zone with the VPC. So our resources we want to access are in this VPC. Okay. Um, all right. So what we need to do now, let's just go in following the stepwise. We already have the private hosted zone. We have an A record. We now need an inbound resolver. So if I go to inbound endpoints, um, I already have one, but I'm just going to show you, go through the steps. But you can create an inbound endpoint here. And this is where you will choose of type delegation. Okay.
So
And then,
this is the new addition, right? You could do
yes,
default, and that would just be used for forwarding,
yes,
or kind of inbound. It was accept forwarded queries from somewhere else, whereas delegation it will allow you to like delegate to that endpoint.
correct. And then you associate with the VPC where you have the private hosted zone, create a security group, choose IPv4 or dual stack. Um, so for delegation, something to note, that we so only okay. So you just mentioned that it's only over port 53, but you can do IPv4 here, and then you can select the availability zone where you want this endpoint to be deployed. Um, you can choose a subnet as well. So you probably subnet.
And then the VPC
And
you associated is relevant because any VPC, any private hosted zone that's associated with that VPC would be visible, right? If a private hosted zone is missing, would that delegation still work? Or it's important that this specific private hosted zone is also associated with the VPC that you have a delegation endpoint associated with.
yes, it is. Private the private hosted zone or the VPC where you have the private hosted zone has to be the one that you associate with this endpoint.
Got it.
Correct. Yeah.
And then if question from Ken, if you wanted to mix, right? Say you have some forwarding that you want to accept some forwarded queries, but at the same time you want to accept some iterative queries. So ultimately you rely on delegation. You would just need to create two different types of endpoints, uh, right? Normal and delegation endpoint. I'm assuming Ken is saying four because he's talking about AZs. So there would
Yeah,
be two AZs and one in each AZ. But ultimately, I need to think about a normal or default, and then the delegation endpoint if I want to mix both, right?
that's right. So you would need to create two for delegation essentially because we recommend two ANIs um, per endpoint, and you would need separate ones
Yeah.
for
The
default.
naming convention, I guess, because I've seen the naming convention used in different ways. Sometimes the endpoint means multiple ENIs. Sometimes people refer to the endpoint as a per AZ endpoint. So if you create a default endpoint, that means if you have two AZs, that means two endpoints. I always feel like the ENI is a part of an endpoint feature. So I don't know what's the official stance, Adish, like from a naming
It
convention.
Yeah, I've seen them use interchangeably, but officially we say, and that's how we even price. Like we say, your price per ENI, and each endpoint can have one or more ENIs, um, and we recommend that customers have a minimum of two for failover.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So it would be endpoint DNIs. You would have you would have four endpoint DNIs, but two endpoints, one default, one delegation.
Correct. So two endpoints, but four ENIs.
Cool.
All right. Yeah. So that's essentially how just create an endpoint. I didn't. I won't create one because I already have one, but just to show you that it's a matter of a few clicks. I already have an endpoint here. This is the one I call my delegation endpoint, and it has these two IP addresses. Okay. Um, okay. Now, to the next step. Um,
So we're done on the AWS side, it sounds like, right? We have all the elements.
yes, we do. We have the endpoint. We have the private hosted zone. We have associated the endpoint with the VPC where you have the private hosted zone. So we are essentially done on the AWS side. Now, going to the on-premises side, we need to do two things. We need to delegate um, AWS.healthtech in this zone and then create an NS record that points to the IP addresses of the endpoints we just created. So let me pull my box in view now. So here I have so let me just give, so this again just kind of mimics what we saw earlier. This is the parent zone example.com. Within this parent zone, I have delegated two subzones,
Is there a way
fintech.example.
to zoom in that a little bit again?
Yeah, so this is, yeah, there's no way to zoom in for this, unfortunately, but,
Hold on, let me see if I can do this and kind of hide our faces and at least
okay,
have a little bit of a better
okay.
view.
Yeah, but this partial command also shows the delegation. Let me clear screen and run it again. So this again to the person that asked whether this works with AD zones with Microsoft DNS, it does. So this is a Microsoft DNS, and as you can see, I have two delegated zones, fintech and health tech. Now that's for this top level DNS
Yeah.
server.
So this is not
This
delegation that you're doing to AWS yet, right? You just happen
not
to
yet.
have a
Exactly.
delegation within your own environment.
Exactly.
Okay. Yep.
Exactly. Now this is the server for healthtech.example.com. Okay, so I have delegated from the first server to the second server, this one, and within this server, this is where I have now delegated to Route 53 and endpoint.
Hmm.
So I have delegated AWS.healthtech to Route 3 endpoints. These IP addresses are the IPs of the endpoints we have here. That's 238 and 105. Okay,
Hmm.
so going back to 1 second, just going back to the floor. Yeah, so again, we have also completed these two steps, the delegation and then pointing the NS record to the IP address of the inbound resolver. So with that said, we should not be able to query, run queries from a client or from elsewhere. So let's go back to the console and look at the records we have in the hosted zone and try to query it. Hopefully it doesn't. Okay. Not sure why it's taking me to cloud formation. All right, so sorry. So the hosted zone I'm looking for is health tech here. So I have an app2.healthtech.example.com, which has this IP address. So let's attempt to query this record from the client. Let's do honest lookup.
Oh,
Okay, let's try
so
again.
you didn't sacrifice to the demo gods?
Yeah, like, so is this app two? Let's see. Yeah, the demo gods are not spawning right now. Let's
Not on your
see.
side.
Okay, now it's working. So it's 10.3.4. And what I wanted to show as well in this demo is to show this is a previous request I made, but I just wanted you to take a look. Let me see if I can zoom in a bit more here. I don't know if this is clear enough, but if you look at lines 539 to 546, you see what Adish was trying to explain earlier about the iterative queries, which endpoints resolver did not support before. So this is the client requesting for this record, and then what you have here is the iteration. As you can see, this goes from the parents server to the child zone, and they keep exchanging until. So here, this guy returns the the name server, okay, and then it eventually returns the actual record, which is then forwarded to the client. So these lines, I don't know if this is obvious enough, but it shows that it shows the iteration, the iterative queries we were referring to earlier, which wasn't supported before.
Yeah. So you're asking the authoritative server at first for example.com, hey, who's health tech, and then well, actually you're asking for the final who's up to AWS health tech
Yes,
dot
yes,
example.com, but it fills goes and checks with example.com to find out, okay, who is authoritative for health tech, and then follows the chain of like questions to health tech. Then all these servers until the AWS dot server are on premise, and eventually the final query to the AWS dot server goes through a delegation endpoint to then
exactly.
get answers on the specific IP address.
Yes.
Cool, nice.
And yeah, so that's pretty much how to set up your inbound delegation. Um, Again, this actually shows tiers, but we could easily have also delegated directly from the first server to endpoint resolver. But I just want to show that this supports. So endpoint resolver is able to be part of your DNS namespace hierarchy, the delegation chain. It works very nicely with customers. For customers who have big customers who have, for example, we do have customers who manage their own private root servers. Okay, so they manage everything from the dot to the .com to the .core. They have servers for all these, and today with this new feature, endpoint resolver can be part of that chain very easily for them,
Yeah.
so that they don't have to manage anything as infrastructure.
Yeah, I remember when we chatted about it. I think the bit that made it super clear for me is like if you imagine you have 100 branches, right, where you have some people that are doing DNS queries, right? So 100 branches, and if prior to the delegation, what you would have to do is in each one of those branches configure the local resolver to forward a query for a particular domain to the inbound endpoint. Right, so you got 100 sites, you go to 100 name servers, you do the updates, resolver servers, sorry, or to update your 100 resolvers to do the forwarding. And then if there's a new domain or new host name, then you have to do it all over again across 100 sites.
Mm,
What we're saying with delegation is that you don't have to change your resolvers. The resolvers already have the logic and builds to be able to follow a delegation path. So all you need to do is in your parent zone, you just say, go to AWS for this specific subdomain, and it will happen automatically without you having to go and like update 100 different sites, having different resolvers with complicated forwarding rules.
yes, exactly. Okay. Let me see if we can quickly also show the one for outbound. It's pretty similar. So the outbound, again, is very similar. In this case, the parent zone is on route 53 and allows you to also delegate on premises. Here we have example.dev as a private hosted zone, and I'm able to delegate the fintech dot example.dev back to the on-premises server, so that queries that originate from the VPC are able to follow that delegation chain up to the on-premises DNS servers. The process is very similar. In this case, we'll have to create an outbound resolver endpoint for the VPC. So in the example.com private hosted zone, you then create an NS record for the subdomain that will then point to the authoritative DNS server on premises. And then you also have to create a delegation rule, right? For that on-premises subdomain, and then associate that rule with the VPC. And then you also need to add a glue record. A glue record is how Route 53 will resolve the on-premises DNS server.
So,
This is if the DNS server is in domain. That means it's in the same domain as the private hosted zone. If it's not in the same domain as the private hosted zone, you need to create a forward rule. That's what Route 3 is going to use to know the IP address of the on-premises
yep,
server,
yep. I've shared again.
essentially.
I've shared in the chat your blog. I don't know if we're going to have time because we need to start wrapping
Yeah,
up in a few minutes. So I don't know if there's going to be time to go through
it's fine.
the forward rules, but I think we get the picture. Is just in this case, you have the parent zone in AWS as a private hosted zone, and then you're delegating to a child zone that's outside of AWS. And the way you would forward those iterative queries would be through this time an outbound endpoint.
Correct.
Cool.
Correct. And
Um,
there's one. Is there a question in
yeah,
the chat?
there's actually a few questions in the chat that
Oh,
I
okay.
think I wanted to touch on before we run
Okay.
out of time.
Yeah.
Because there's some interesting. I know there was a little bit of a discussion about cost and endpoints. Actually, there being some cost associated with deploying endpoints. There is underlying infrastructure, right, that AWS has to deploy to be able to handle this traffic. So that's usually when that's coming from. I think the on the cost side, what I wanted to touch on is the biggest misconception I've run into with customers is them thinking they need more than those two endpoints, right? If they have two AZs. Sometimes customers think I need an endpoint in every VPC, and all of a sudden it becomes super expensive.
Yeah,
So I kind of a tip that I would give to anybody, and I think addition, I'm sure you probably seen that as well, is to like if you need an inbound access, whether it's forwarding or delegation, just put all the private hosted zones that you want to expose in the VPC that this endpoint lives on, and then that all you need is just that one endpoint. You don't have to deploy endpoints
yeah,
across different VPCs.
Correct.
correct.
And same goes for outbound. So I think that's the biggest misconfiguration I've seen. And I had customers come back to us and like, all of a sudden we have these all huge costs for endpoints, and they deployed outbound endpoints for every single VPC they had, where they could have gotten away with one. The other question I think that's going to be interesting too. It's from Ken around uh, the Route 53 DNS firewall, which is an interesting
Mhm.
question because for forwarding queries, when you're forwarding queries into a VPC, I think we would if there's a DNS firewall enabled on the VPC where the inbound default endpoint is, that the Route 53 DNS firewall would trigger. Is this also going to trigger on those iterative queries coming in from outside? Do we know?
That's an interesting question. I've never heard that before. It's if it, the forwarding will take place because the original prior to delegation, the original was that the default would be it will get forwarded to the router resolver, and if the query is destined for something on the internet, and if you have a DNS firewall installed, then it would kick in. The rules would kick in. But in this case, since it's a delegation feature, it's delegated to a private hosted zone. It's not going out to the internet. It's so DNS firewall would effectively not kick in.
Yeah,
But
there wouldn't
but
be any value, right? I guess even if it wouldn't be in the path, but I guess there wouldn't be much value in your filtering because the delegation is very explicit. You have to have that zone. Otherwise, it's going nowhere, right? If you delegated something to the wrong destination and the zone doesn't exist, then not much is going to happen.
correct.
Cool. Interesting question, Ken. And then another one from Ken around limits. Are limits kind of similar? Uh, do we know from a number of queries? The I think usually it was the 10,000 queries per second. I think that was
10,000.
the forwarding. I don't know if there's differences in the delegation. I would expect that for delegation you wouldn't really see the level of volume, right, that you might see with forwarding. Because I could forward everything. I could say star forwards to inbound endpoint and ultimately have my inbound endpoint do all the DNS resolution to anything in the world. Whereas with delegation, it's a little bit more granular. So I don't know if we would ever even see that level of volume? I would assume is going to be definitely less than with forwarding.
It's going to be less. Yeah. And to make sure that we have the right quotas, you can always go to the technical documentation, but I'll confirm that for you. Um, so
Yeah,
in case of delegation, we don't change anything in terms of our quota. So what you had previously for your resolver endpoints, that will stay. So there's no difference.
got it. Um, okay. Any Adish, Tekena, any final comments, mentions, anything
Yeah,
you want to add?
Yeah. Okay.
I I would love for our viewers to always test out our feature and give us feedback. We always like that, and we want to make things better. So I would implore all our viewers to go try it out. Let us know what you think about it. I also have a few resources to share if you want to take a look at this and go deeper into it. So there's obviously the What's New announcement that we had back in June. Um, Tekina wrote a really good blog post about this also. Um, I request everyone to search for it and review that. That will provide you a very good walkthrough of what we have talked about today. And
Already
then if you
shared in the
want to
chat.
go,
Yep. So look
yeah,
through the chat, folks, if you're looking for it.
and then you can go through the tutorial on our technical documentation as well. And then Tom, hopefully this will also be available to our viewers afterwards so that they can always
Yep.
go back.
It's gonna be available in the routing loop, and then we upload it on YouTube, so it's being hosted there. I know in the past we had some videos on demand for Twitch. And we get a lot of feedback to recover those. Unfortunately, they haven't been recovered, so we lost some videos in the past. But now we're making sure that it doesn't happen again. So we're keeping track of all the videos on YouTube. So this will be available on demand pretty much later today, probably if folks want to follow.
Yeah, just as a last parting shot, I would say yes. I would encourage the people to look at the blog post because there are other use cases that we didn't have time to share. For example, Endpoint also allows you to work with delegation you have on premises. So if you have delegation only on premises across your sites across the globe, you can still have resolver endpoint follow that delegation. So we discussed inbound delegation and then outbound from private hosted zone, but you can also have the delegation only on premises and still use endpoint to follow that delegation. So I would encourage people to go through the blog and see the other use cases available there as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for that. Thanks, Takina. Thanks, Adish. Thanks, everybody else, for joining. Well, I won't be there next week, but the show continues next week, so come and join us. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.